Alright everyone, so it's about time for a tier list. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that it's a global tier list, so it's not just that it's for 1v1 or 2v2's rating, whatever, so you have to keep the context in mind. But let's start with the counters. So I can already start by putting Discharge and Cold Snap to a S tier here. You have to keep in mind is that they excel at different things. Discharge is only for aggro, because it only pulls enemies and nothing else. Where if you need to run away from someone with Discharge, then it simply doesn't help you. Where Cold Snap, it actually works both ways. You can go aggro and then freeze them in close range, or you can also get it triggered from medium or long range and then get a really big movement speed boost for a long time, and then you can use that to actually run away. Mistrance. It also goes in S tier. It is the best counter in the game by far for straight up survivability. There's nothing, it highly excels at both chase power and run away power at the same time. One of the biggest values you can get from Mistrance is, on top of course the fear, which is a true combo into attacks like spear Q and stuff, but it's also because you can get the jewel effect for 4 phantasm stacks. So more or less from just 2 counter triggers alone, even if they don't fear anything or whatever, then you get pretty much 10 phantasm stacks already, and then you can get a huge lead on the tempo in PvP. Blood White, I feel that it took a massive hit. It goes into OK tier. The thing is, in terms of identity, what Blood White used to have going for it was the immaterial. But now, for some reason, Discharge, as well as Cold Snap, they can also get immaterial duration. And then you have to look at something else in Blood White. And it has the invisibility, it has more damage. But after the damage nerfs, it gets put in OK tier, where if it kept the damage it usually had, then it would be good, I would say. Then you have the movement speed spells. All these, they go straight to S tier, straight away. The thing that these two excelled at differently is that generally, if you only use one of these in your team, then the bigger the team, the more you're leaning towards Blood Rage. I would only recommend considering Surge is if you're like 1v1 or 2v2. Where of course if you're playing like a duos and one of you uses Rage, then the other one can just use Surge, instead of double Rage, because then they can overlap and then you miss out on effectiveness. Curtain also goes in S tier, and that's simply because it's the best by far movement speed spell in the game. As a base value, it has a much higher movement speed percentage buff compared to Surge and Rage. But that's not really the deal breaker. The deal breaker is actually that both Surge and Rage has a jewel for increasing its movement speed, but it's only by a pretty small amount. Where on Curtain, it's a much bigger amount you can increase. So they cannot compete with the movement speed from Curtain. But you have to keep in mind that if you are facing whip players, then they can simply auto-attack through the Curtain, so the Curtain can struggle if you are trying to do a intense PvP in close range. Then it can struggle. Then we have the dashes. For S tier, we can straight up put these up here. The thing you have to understand here is that you just must not be one of those bonobo monkeys that just tunnel vision on Chaos Dash just because, oh my god, it has one extra dash, nothing else can compete. That's not really the case. If you use the other dashes correctly, they can be as good or better sometimes than Chaos Dash. cast Frost Dash here, it offers a really fat shield for a long time and has the possibility to freeze. Well, in other words, Frost Dash, it offers both chill, frost, and insta freeze. And insta freeze, it means to get your primary charge from another source for chill, for example from Cold Snap or the spell crit chance necklace, you can charge your primary with chill, and then if you frost dash and hit an enemy, then with the freeze jewel you apply freeze instantly without having to first apply chill. And there's some debate whether or not it's intended or not, because it existed throughout the whole duration of Gloomward and it's still not fixed, so who knows. It is a bullshit interaction, I must say. Blood Dash, what it offers is immense healing. With these two dashes, you're normally settling for 50 HP healing per dash. But what Blood Dash offers is, especially with the boot armor and the white healing jewels and stuff, then on one target alone, you can heal 110 HP. And then you have Storm Dash, which is, it has a very easy way to hit the primary attack where you land a stun. You can apply the static by either dashing through the enemy with the white jewel on the dash, or use another storm spell like Polarity Shift and whatnot, and then simply quickly do a quick spear stab, stun them, and then that stun is enough to combo into a spear Q. That's why it also has a lot of value. Illusion Dash, it pretty much goes in niche. If you're trying to use Illusion Dash in aggro PvP where you're actually trying to kill the enemy, then you might as well uninstall. But this is not the situation we're talking about. We're talking about just simply running away. This is where Illusion Dash can be one of the most frustrating dashes to play against, because if they are using a movement speed spell, let's say for example Curtain even, you buff yourself with movement speed there, you dash, you have rogue blood, rogue armor, then the distance you can cover during the recast, it is so extreme, and the enemy has to like stay in between the clone and you, because they don't know if you teleport one way or not. And then you simply toy with them because they cannot keep up with that teleportation that happens so often with the rogue blood. What to keep in mind is that the projectiles from this dash may pull you if they hit a discharge, and if they do that, then definitely uninstall. So you have to keep that in mind. As long as they're not using discharge, then it can be extremely frustrating to pin down an Illusion Dasher. But in turn, the Illusion Dasher cannot really kill you in turn, because their clone will just trigger your counters for free and you can farm it that way. The Green Dash, this one is special, and that's because it goes right here. So then we have Void and Aftershock. Both these, they go straight to S tier. They are really good spells to deal with counters, especially if they are the kind of player that abuses double counter. Void is just very spammable, and it's pretty easy to force cooldowns from it because it has a pretty quick cast time, and then the explosion happens also kinda quickly. Then we can go to the next AOE spells. They go straight below Aftershock, and the reason they do that is because Aftershock, it snares the moment it touches an enemy. So if even if you're playing against a rogue, and then you're getting range, you're fighting in melee and stuff, and then they use counter in your face, then if you simply Aftershock them, it snares them, and then they have no chance to walk out of the AoE because they're snared. So either they have to face tank the hit, or they have to burn a cooldown. And when you look at these AoEs, Bone and Ice Nova, and then it's way too easily to... You can only reliably hit them on a rogue if you have a setup like CC. Otherwise you pretty much have no chance. They can just easily sidestep The only thing Ball Lightning has going for it is just the stun we cast. The damage itself and stuff is like pretty damn useless. It even breaks CC, so it's not like you can just incap someone, Ball Lightning, and then speak you. That doesn't work. So you just have to quickly cast it on someone using counter, and then recast it for a tiny stun, and then you can only maybe use the stun for something. So it just loses a lot of value in PvP. Cyclone. There's a lot of controversy about this one. I want to put it in niche because it's not good for any situation at all, because especially when it comes to raiding, then it just doesn't exist basically, because as soon as it touches a stair or wall, anything, it just disappears. And if you're using this in roaming PvP, then you pretty much need to use Rogue Blood, because you need to force yourself in melee range so the cyclone can actually do something. So it's very for specific situations with the right build, because if you're using this in roaming and you're Scholar Blood, and then of course, like enemies, they probably cannot deal with you in close range at all. But if the enemy is Rogue and you're Scholar, then the Rogue can very easily control the fight and control the distance between you and him, and then constantly outrange you when you're using Cyclone. So that's the problem. Mosquito, I would normally put it in uninstall, but it also goes in niche. The only thing it's good for is long Scholar combos. There are some combos that utilizes both Mosquito and Lance, where if you land the CC at the right time with the right cooldowns, you can essentially almost one-shot an enemy player that is not Warrior Blood. So that's why it goes in niche. If you're just using this because, oh, the sustain is so good and the zoning is so good, then you should uninstall. But now it stays here. There's many answers also when you're trying to hug the Mosquito when you summon it. There's many answers to just say no. You can, for example, sword E the Mosquito to send it to heaven, and then the healing orbs, they just float and then nobody can touch them. You can also, like, the enemy can just go in between you and the Mosquito and then Reaper Q, and then you get split apart, and then, yeah. There's just many answers. Blood Fountain. Straight here. Same with Sanguine Coil. Healing spells in this game in PvP is just not worth it generally. Especially when healing pots are so easily spammable in the middle of PvP. So there's no reason to sacrifice a spell slot just for healing. When you can just spam heal pots, then you just lose a spell compared to using a much more value spell like an offensive one. Soulburn. It pretty much just goes in OK tier. It just has a very, very long cast time. So of course, like if you're playing against the average player on servers, then they are very likely to get silenced by it, and then it goes straight to S tier. But as soon as you're facing competent players, you should typically expect to only get benefit from the spell block duration, which is very short. It's only something I would recommend using in team fights, because you actually need a team to set up CC for you, so you can land the spell block. You have to keep that in mind. The barriers. They go straight to good tier. They're not that good, but they're also not so bad at the same time. It has potential for extreme value, unlike any other spell, where if the enemy is for example, stupid enough to do a full spear queue into your barrier, then they can get massively deleted just because of that. The reason they don't go to STS because for some reason they have 1 extra second cooldown compared to the counters, but the thing is you can also hit these barriers and go unpunished because they don't punish you instantly compared to the counters. You can, for example, axe Q into a frost barrier and then do another action to avoid the AOE hit where you get shielded to possibly get recasted and frozen. You can just like dash, pistol-y, many things. The same for chaos barrier, you can just hit it and then just iframe when you think they're gonna shoot the projectile and then reliably avoid the stun. What of the damned? Uninstall. The main problem with these unholy spells is because they're summons. They're just... The main downside of these is because it's uncontrolled triggers of enemy defensives, which can be charging the chaos barrier, triggering cold snap so they get a fat shield, you possibly get frozen, they get movement speed, everything. All kinds of stuff like that, and they get feared by mistrans. It's just uncontrolled triggers. But on top of that, the downside is also that they are used as healing sources, straight up. It can especially be tough if you're fighting someone with blood dash, which means it's very important that you avoid giving them value out of the blood dash, because if they hit it once, it's 110 HP, and they can simply use that on your skeletons and farm healing that way. Lance. It's good. Not S tier, but good. It's just hard to hit it. Against rogues, without a setup, it's easily sidestepable. It's pretty RNG to hit it that way. But the value from hitting it is very high, and it does high damage, so that's why it goes in good tier. Aegis, it's just like Surge and Rage. It still goes in S tier. The thing that's funny about Aegis is that you can get punished from attacking it, which doesn't really make much sense, in my opinion, and that's how it works. The Jewel for Fear. So if the enemy has for example messed up their cooldown, so you go in their face, you cast Aegis and then just keep smacking them with greatsword autos, where if they try to damage your back, they can just get double punished because then they get feared from the shield. But what to keep in mind about Aegis is that it's the only spell in the whole game that can extremely easy just say no to any combo that is very dangerous happening to a teammate. And it also works at long range. It's like a bigger range than, for example, what heartstrike can travel. It can be so invaluable in teamfights to have as many no cards as possible. If they're getting CC'd and about to get speed queued by, for example, 2 players, which can easily delete half the HP, then you can just from range say like, nope, cast Aegis on your teammate, drop, it stops the whole combo. Also works as a big counter to Merciless Charge. No matter if it's your teammate getting stunned from the charge into a potential combo, but even on yourself, you can cast it before you get hit by Merciless Charge, and then Merciless Charge will break the shield, and then they get feared, and then there's no combo for them. But you can also cast Aegis on yourself between the push and the stun from charge, so that if they try to follow up on the CC in very close range, for example spear Q, then they simply also get feared, and then you essentially take 0 damage, and you can grace Q them back to win the trade. Frostbite, it's good. It is very hard, I mean very fast and hard-hitting spell at the same time. Especially if you have the jewel for increasing damage on shield and frozen enemies, then you can hit super hard. And due to its speed, short cast time, fast travel time, then it's also a great tool to fake with. Spectral Wolf is also good. The only downside about Spectral Wolf is like, especially in bigger team fights like 3v3 or 4v4, it can get kinda chaotic. And if you're using this for example hit an enemy and then it bounces to an enemy that is close to your teammate in melee range, and then that enemy uses counter like cold snap, then your Spectral Wolf can actually hit that cold snap and then potentially freeze your teammate, which can then get spear queued and punished because of that. But of course it has potential for massive value, because especially if you're a scholar and land a few crits with it, and you hit the bounces on like at least 3 players, then just from that, the total amount of damage is very big, which no other spell comes close to. Well, of course, Chaos Barrier, if it's properly charged, it can also get up there, but it's only on one target. And it has a much higher condition compared to just hitting a Spectral Wolf. Wave Spear, uninstall. Because of course the downside is that you cannot fake with it, and if you cancel the cast after the jump, then for some reason it goes on a massive cooldown, which is about 12 seconds. So the downtime from cancelling it is quite extreme. But you can see it coming from miles away. It's extremely easy to react to, so that's why it goes right here. Untitled Chapter S tier. It just does way too much and is way too spammable. I would say it's kinda the same problem as Void. A good change, just for a starter, is just increase the cooldowns of both Void and Shift. If I remember correctly, then the cooldown of Shift is 8 seconds. It should be 10 seconds, because it has 2 charges. It's way too spammable. It has insanely short cast time and short travel time, and then it can constantly snare, and there's no diminishing return on snare, so that can be very annoying to play against. But it's also so defensive and offensive at the same time, because it gives you the opportunity to cast it in melee range. So with the jewel for making an explosion after reaching your destination, then you can do 90% plus 50% damage, which is quite a lot. And on the defensive side is that it's basically a jail-free escape card that is super strong. The enemy can, for example, Great Sword Q you, Mace Q you, Merciless charge you, and then you can just say no and hit them with a quick shift, where you just deny their attack and put it on cooldown, where you deal damage in return. So the uptime of this is just ridiculous in my opinion. It needs to get a cooldown increase at least. Then we have Chaos Volley. It goes in okay tier. It's just pure raw damage. And any day, any time, for example, I would much rather go for a lance hit compared to a volley, because you can hit a lance, which is a strong hit, and then follow up with like a potential XE plus spear Q or great sword Q. Where volley is just raw damage, and it's 2 projectiles as well. Shadowbolt goes straight to uninstall tier, especially when you compare to Crystal Lance, because they are to a certain degree identical, where the difference is that Lance, it offers an insta freeze, where Shadowbolt is just raw damage. There is some builds where you can freeze someone and then hit them with Shadowbolt with the jewel that has a vampiric curse, so the initial hit is very small, and that small hit actually does not break the freeze, so you can follow up with like a spear Q while the vampiric curse is a ticking bomb. But in general, the downside is that it's not insta value. You need to hit the ticking timer, and there are so many answers to not take damage from the ticking bomb from Shadowbolt, because you have many iframes and stuff, and you can even cast Aegis to just face tank the hit. Death Knight, it goes into niche. I would consider putting an S tier, but it only breaks the game in one situation, which is just a simple balance problem. is it kind of breaks weight defense, where if defenders are spamming this, then especially with a scholar spamming this, then it's way harder than it has to be to raiders to deal with that. The problem is that the Death Knight has an extreme HP bar for some reason, where it's just not worth it to spend a lot of time to DPS that Death Knight, where even after it expires, where there's no condition for it, it just needs to expire. Then it summons a mage, and that mage is also insanely tanky. And then it can be extremely painful and sad to play against and deal with. But more so what kind of breaks the game is that if you have a raid, the defenders are on top of the ramp, the raiders are below the ramp, then the defenders can just throw down Death Knights onto the raiders, and the Death Knight and the mage just simply puts the raiders in combat, which means they cannot heal if they have lowered their maximum healing. Just constantly puts them in combat, where for some reason for the caster of the Death Knight, they don't get in combat. So pretty much you can just constantly put raiders in combat where they cannot heal, and defenders can just sip some tea at their breach point and just chill, where they can heal if they want to because they don't get put in combat. So just super annoying to play against in raiding. Then we have the ultimates. I want to start by comparing Barrage and Beam. The Beam goes in S tier and Barrage goes in right below. The reason for this is because it is a lot easier to get good value from a Beam because it's AOE compared to projectiles from Barrage. Especially in teamfights, there can be many things that the Barrage can hit that can go wrong. It can be all kinds of, like, for example, mobs, obstacles, barriers, counters, players that you don't want to hit because there's, for example, an enemy that is low HP behind the one that is blocking the hits. Where this one just doesn't give a single fuck and just beams anything in the way. Merciless Charge goes also in S tier. It is a high risk, high reward ultimate because there's many answers for it. Because between the push and the stun, you can dash out of the stun, pistol-y, and even cast Aegis on yourself to just say no to the combo. Where if you land the stun, then you can do if you have both Q and E, which is not that often happens, then you have the opportunity to Reaper E into Spear Q, and your Spear Q will apply the static. So both the static will trigger from both the Spear Q and the Reaper E, and then you can potentially delete someone. Golem ultimate, it goes into niche. Especially in lower team sizes, then it's kinda a stupid ultimate to use, but especially it just gets more value the bigger the team size. And it's something you would typically consider using in raiding, where you're like, for example, 4v4. And then when you're trying to breach, so you push up and you try to force your position at the breach point, then you can actually cast the Golem ultimate to deal with a potential chaos and then just rush some breach damage while just constantly pushing the defenders back. Because basically when you're constantly getting shields from this, it just says you cannot fight us to the enemy team because they cannot fight constant shields, so they just back off and wait a bit. The Wisps, unfortunately, it's just way too bad. It just sucks, straight up, sadly. It has high potential value, I have to give it that, but it's just insanely hard to get that value. You need 3 moons to align to get really high value from it. Heartstrike is basically the same as Merciless Charge. The only difference is that it's much easier to get value out of it. if you incap someone, then you can just merciless heartstrike and that get good value from it. You heal, they get a ticking bomb, and then you can abuse that ticking bomb where you can either attack them early, so you give the enemy a choice, which is, do I have to spend the cooldown now to avoid that hit and then face tank the ticking bomb from heartstrike later, or do I face tank the hit and avoid the ticking bomb from heartstrike? Of course, if they have multiple answers like 2 iframes, then they can avoid both, but then at least they burn their cooldowns, and then you can capitalize on that later. Leap, it also goes in S tier. It's just much rarer to see this ultimate compared to others, but the reason I put it here is because it is the safest ultimate in the game. Because let's say you have used all your cooldowns and you are using one of these two, and then you see an enemy charge, merciless charge on you. You know if you get hit by it, you can get massively punished for a large amount of damage. And if you're using one of these two, then you don't have time to use your own ultimate to escape, because it's way too late for that. But the leap, it is an instacast, so you can just hop away and then boop, you're safe. You can even potentially punish these ultimates where if someone merciless charges you, you can just leap on your own position, so they miss their charge, and then you can potentially freeze them and then speak you to win the trade that way. This Typhoon just goes straight to uninstall. There's way too many answers to just deny this ultimate. It takes as little as a counter or a Reaper Q, because you can still get hit by anything doing this ultimate and it triggers counters and barriers, so just sucks. The spiders, normally I would put them here, but they also go to niche, and that's just because of the special scholar shenanigans where you can stun lock someone, chain CC them with the spider damage to potentially delete them. Ice block, I feel that is just sucks always, pretty much. The shield amount limit is just very low. It just gets broken super fast and it does shit damage. And then of course you have to consider, it's a jail-free escape card. Okay, but the thing is, you might as well just use one of the more offensive ultimates. If you have a teammate that's for example getting merciless charged, then you can just use your own merciless charge or own Arctic Leap on top of that, and then the enemy either has to get hit by your ultimate and then you can punish back, or the enemy has to just full disengage because you're using your own ultimate. Where with the ice block, it just doesn't give you the opportunity to punish them back. It just makes the enemy go away and that's it. So not much value from it. Octavian ultimate, I would say it goes one step below these ultimates, and it's because there's a lot more answers for this ultimate compared to these ones. It can be very hard to get good value from this ultimate. You have to be pretty smart when to time it, because if you cast it on someone, then it takes as little as one dash or one Gracer Q or a bit of trouble with some pistol E, and then just like that, they're already out of the circle from the ultimate, and then they took minimal amounts of damage. So here we go. If you want to discuss anything or want me to elaborate on some choices, then you can just ask me in the comment section.